seemed to be sending out a soft radiance, which was clearer than moonlight, and softer than daylight, and at the end of the long avenue of trees opposite to her, the princess saw a palace of clear crystal which blazed like the sun. At that moment a slight sound behind her made her start around, and there stood Percinet himself. "Did I frighten you, my princess?" said he. "I come to bid you welcome to our fairy palace, in the name of the Queen, my mother, who is prepared to love you as much as I do." The princess joyfully mounted with him into a little sledge, drawn by 2 stags, which bounded off and drew them swiftly to the wonderful palace, where the Queen received her with the greatest kindness, and a splendid banquet was served at once. Graciosa was so happy to have found Percinet, and to have escaped from the gloomy forest with all its terrors, that she was very hungry and very merry, and they were a gay party. After supper they went into another lovely room, where the crystal walls were covered with pictures, and the princess saw with great surprise that her own history was represented, even down to the moment when Percinet found her in the forest. "Your painters must indeed be diligent," she said, pointing out the last picture to the prince. "They are obliged to be, for I will not have anything forgotten that happens to you," he answered. When the princess grew sleepy, 24 charming maidens put her to bed in the prettiest room she had ever seen, and then sang to her so sweetly that Graciosa's dreams were all of mermaids, and cool sea waves, and caverns in which she wandered with Percinet. But when she woke up again, her first thought was that, delightful as this fairy palace seemed to her, yet she could not stay in it, but must go back to her father. When she had been dressed by the 24 maidens in a charming robe which the Queen had sent for her, and in which she looked prettier than ever, Prince Percinet came to see her, and was bitterly disappointed when she told him what she had been thinking. He begged her to consider again how unhappy the wicked Queen would make her, and how, if she would but marry him, all the fairy palace would be hers, and his one thought would be to please her. But in spite of everything he could say, the princess was quite determined to go back, though he had last persuaded her to stay 8 days, which was so full of pleasure and amusement that they passed like a few hours. On the last day, Graciosa, who had often felt anxious to know what was going on in her father's palace, said to Percinet that she was sure that he could find out for her, if he would, what reason the Queen had given her father for her sudden disappearance. Percinet at first offered to send his courier to find out, but the princess said, "Oh, isn't there a quicker way of knowing than that?" "Very well," said Percinet, "you shall see for yourself." So off they went together to the top of a very high tower, which, like the rest of the castle, was built entirely of rock crystal. There the prince held Graciosa's hand in his, and made her put the tip of her little finger into her mouth, and look towards the town, and immediately she saw the wicked Queen go to the king, and heard her say to him, "That miserable princess is dead, and no great loss either. I have ordered that she will be buried at once." And then the princess saw how she dressed up a log of wood and had it buried, and how the old king cried, and all the people murmured that the Queen had killed Graciosa with her cruelties, and that she ought to have her head cut off. When the princess saw that the king was so sorry for her pretended death that he could neither eat nor drink, she cried, "Ah, Percinet, take me back quickly if you love me." And so, though he did not want to at all, he was obliged to promise that he would let her go. "You may not regret me, princess," he said sadly, "for I fear that you do not love me well enough. but I foresee that you will more than once regret that you left this fairy palace where we have been so happy." But in spite of all he could say, she bade farewell to the Queen, his mother, and prepared to set out. So Percinet, very unwillingly, brought the little sledge with the stags, and she mounted beside him. But they had hardly gone 20 yards when a tremendous noise behind her made Graciosa look back, and she saw the palace of crystal fly into 1,000,000 splinters, like the spray of a fountain, and vanish. "Oh, Percinet!" she cried. "What has happened? The palace is gone." "Yes," he answered, "my palace is a thing of the past. You will see it again, but not until after you have been buried." "Now you are angry with me," said Graciosa in her most coaxing voice, "though after all I am more to be pitied than you are." When they got near the palace the prince made the sledge and themselves invisible, so the princess got in unobserved, and ran up to the great hall where the king was sitting all by himself. At first he was very much startled by Graciosa's sudden appearance, but she told him how the queen had left her out in the forest, and how she had caused a log of wood to be buried. The king, who did not know what to think, sent quickly and had it dug up, and sure enough it was as the princess had said. And then he caressed Graciosa, and made her sit down to supper with him, and they were as happy as possible. But someone had by this time told the wicked queen that Graciosa had come back, and was at supper with the king, and in she flew in a terrible fury. The poor old king quite trembled before her, and when she declared that Graciosa was not the princess after all, but a wicked impostor, and that if the king did not give her up at once she would go back to her own castle and never see him again, he had not a word to say, and really seemed to believe that it was not Graciosa after all. So the queen, in great triumph, sent for her waiting woman, who dragged the unhappy princess away, and shut her up in a garret. They took away all her jewels and her pretty dress, and gave her a rough cotton frock, wooden shoes, and a little cloth cap. There was some straw in a corner, which was all she had for a bed, and they gave her a very little bit of black bread to eat. In this miserable plight Graciosa did indeed regret the fairy palace, and she would have called Percinet to her aid, only she felt sure that he was still vexed with her for leaving him, and thought that she could not expect him to come. Meanwhile the queen had sent for an old fairy, as malicious as herself, and said to her, "You must find me some task for this fine princess which she cannot possibly do, for I mean to punish her, and if she does not do what I order, she will not be able to say that I am unjust." So the old fairy said she would think it over, and come again the next day. When she returned, she brought with her a skein of thread, 3 times as big as herself. It was so fine that a breath of air would break it, and so tangled that it was impossible to see the beginning or the end of it. The queen sent for Graciosa, and said to her, "Do you see this skein? Set your clumsy fingers to work upon it, for I must have it disentangled by sunset, and if you break a single thread it will be the worse for you." So saying, she left her, locking the door behind her with 3 keys. The princess stood dismayed at the sight of the terrible skein. If she did but turn it over to see where it began, she broke 1,000 threads, and not one could she disentangle. At last she threw it into the middle of the floor, crying, "Oh, Percinet, this fateful scheme will be the death of me if you will not forgive me and help me once more." And immediately in came Percinet, as easily as if he had had all the keys in his own possession. "Here I am, princess, as much as ever at your service," said he, "though really you are not very kind to me." Then he just stroked the skein with his wand, and all the broken threads joined themselves together